Okay, thank you everybody for coming and tuning in. Tonight, we begin our exploration of Bracha of Shomea Tefilah. Sometimes this is also known as the Bracha of Shema Kolenu. And if you count the Brachot of Shmona Esrei, at least in the counting of the Bavli, the correct number here is number 16. This is Bracha number 16. And we've made a lot of progress in Shmona Esrei. We've covered most of the Brachot. We've learned a lot of things. But this Bracha is unique in that it doesn't have any particular topic. This bracha is simply an inclusive bracha. It's a bracha that was designed as a catch-all, a cap, so to speak, a chatima, a cap-all for all of the 12 middle blessings. And it's for that time when you need a daven for a shidduch, if you need a daven to have children, somebody wants to pray to pass a test, somebody wants to pray to have a safe flight, all of these needs that a person might have that are not reflected in the standard 12 bakashot of Shmona Esrei are placed here. People have kavanah in this bracha. This all-inclusive bracha is where people petition Hashem for their particular individualistic petitions and for people's personal prayers. Now, all scholars agree on the function of Shomea Tefilah. No matter how you structure Shmona Esrei, and there's so many ways to structure it, everybody agrees that its function is a general ending. And as we've noted before, and if for the people watching, I've put a chart on the screen. As we've noted before, there are multiple different ways of structuring the Amidah. We have ways of dividing the middle between personal and collective prayers. You could do personal, spiritual, personal, physical, national rebuilding and realization, and then you could divide them by present and future. No matter how you divide the bakashot in the middle of the Shmona Esrei, everybody agrees that Shomea Tefilah is a general ending. What's important to understand about this is that this conforms with the theory that the Amidah, throughout all of its history, was always a tripartite structure. Meaning tripartite is a word that means made up of three parts. So no matter when the Amidah was designed or who designed the Amidah, in its earliest forms, whether its earliest forms were for the Chagim, whether its earliest form was for Chol, it was a tripartite Tefilah. And we see this, for example, by the Machloket Bet Shammai and Bet Hillel for Rosh Hashanah, right? How many blessings do we say? 8 or 9. We find this by Taniot. There's many other places in the Mishnah where we see something like an Amidah that existed in the time of the Beit HaMikdash. So whatever that was, we don't know. It could have been a real Amidah. Different Chachamim are divided as to the meaning of the earliest forms of the Amidah. But because we see that the section of Bakashot is closed by Shema Kolenu, that's Shema Kolenu, or Shomea Tefilah, whatever you want to call it, that shows us that the bakashot are a distinct subrubric. They begin to the middle. They belong to the middle. There's the first 3 brachot, there's the middle 12, and then there's the last 2 or 3 brachot. And we're going to explore that more in the future as to what happened to the end of Shmona Esrei. If this is the close, what happens? Why is there more to Shmona Esrei? Why do we need to say more? That's what we're going to explore in following weeks. Now, what is the earliest mention we have of this bracha? So one could argue that the earliest mention is the Mishnah in Yoma. The Mishnah in Yoma describes 8 brachot that the Kohen Gadol has to say. There was a special ceremony done on Yom Kippur in the Beit HaMikdash. This ceremony involved taking out a Sefer Torah and reading from it, just to simplify the order of the ceremony. They would take out a Sefer Torah and the Kohen Gadol would read from it. I'm not sure if they read a Haftarah. I haven't seen it in a while, but the Mishnah itself says the brachot, the 8 brachot that a Kohen Gadol has to say after this ceremony. And it says as follows: Mevarech aleh shemona brachot al Torah, habocher b'Torah, al havodah, he says shotchad v'na'avod, etc., etc. He does a bunch of brachot. Hashochin b'tzion, al hakohanim. What's the bracha of kohanim? Habocher b'kohanim. Then at the end, meaning the Kohen Gadol said all of these brachot. One is for the avodah to be accepted. The other one is to thank Hashem. The other one is for mechilat avon. Lastly, al shar ha'tefilah utchina bakasha she'amachai Yisrael tzrichin livashel lefanecha, and for all of the other prayers and supplications and petitions that your nation Israel needs before you for salvation. Baruch atah Hashem, Shomea Tefilah. At the very end here, the Kohen Gadol in the Beit HaMikdash ends with a separate bracha called Shomea Tefilah, the exact nusach of which we don't know, because it seems here to be describing, paraphrasing what the Kohen Gadol would say at the very end. But this bracha that the Kohen Gadol said was clearly for the Kahal. He was representing the Kahal. Some scholars have looked at this at this Braita, which is really an expansion of the Mishnah, and they've said that, well, this is the earliest form of the Amidah. This is the earliest form of Tefilat Beit HaKnesset, where we would do a series of brachot. And not just, the earliest Jewish prayer, as we've noted in the past, began with its development around a formula called the bracha. When they started linking and chaining brachot one after the other, that's when we had things like the Amidah begin to develop. So this is one of those early records that we have, one of the early relics and clues that we have towards the early formation of the Amidah. The next earliest place you could argue is that we see the bracha of Shomea Tefilah from Nachum Hamadi. Nachum Hamadi was an early Tana. He lived during Bayit Sheni. He was known as one of the Dayanot HaGzelot, I think Dayanot HaGzerot B'Yushalayim. He's one of the great criminal judges in Yerushalayim, and he was a very well-respected Tana in Eretz Yisrael. He was a very respected judge. He lived during Bayit Sheni, and he lived to see the destruction of Bayit Sheni. We don't know much about why he was called Hamadi, the Mede. We know that the Median Empire, if it ever really was a central state-like empire, the Median Empire dissolved in roughly the 6th century. I mean, I think most people are familiar with the idea of Parasu Madai, right? There's Persia and Media. The Persians and the Parthians and let's call them the Persians. The Persians and the Medians were two distinct races and peoples of the Iranian area, let's say, in Earth, the Iranian plateau. Those were two peoples of that area. And we know that the Medes were an incredibly important people to the history of the Iranian area. But we don't know precisely if Media was really an empire. But even if Media was like a real state-like empire and not just a bunch of tribes getting together, that empire dissolved hundreds and hundreds of years before Nachum Hamadi. So when it says he's Nachum Hamadi, the Mede, it probably means that he came from an area that today we would call Iran, or at least west of Iran, like areas that we would today call Iraq. Now, picture it on the screen in front of you is just a cutout of the Persians and the Medians. Under the Tanaim was the Parthian Empire, which was much later than the empires that Cyrus the Great overtook. Most likely, Nachum Hamadi came from the area of Western Iran, and he rubbed shoulders with many of the Tanaim. But we don't know too much about him other than that. We have a few memorot from him. We assume that he was a little bit older than Rabban Gamliel B'Yavne, simply because so many of the other Tanaim in the yeshiva were older than him after the Khurban, but we don't know so much about him. Now, what did he say about Shomea Tefilah? Let's look at the Gemara in Avodah Zarah Daf Zayin Amud Bet. Right, I'm sharing my screen here for anybody following the video. It says over here, Amar Leir of Achabar Minyome la Abaye. One of the Amoraim named Achabar Minyome complained to Abaya. Gavaraba atame atnen. There was a great man who came from our place, meaning from wherever he lived in Bavel, right? Some place which was called the place of the Medes, right? Where Madai. Kol milta de Amar, but everything that he paskind, Amri le nishtaka davar. The Chachamim told him it should be dismissed, V'lo nemar, and it was never repeated, and it was never paskin like him. Nobody ever paskins like Nachum Hamadi. Amar Abaye said, no, there is one halacha which we hold like Nachum Hamadi. And what is that? The Tanya, we learned in the Braita, Nachum Hamadi Amar Omer Shoel Adam Srachav B'Shomea Tefilah. a person should ask his personal petitions in Shomea Tefilah, meaning Nachum Hamadi was not the most popular Tana. In Yavne or in the Sanhedrin in Yerushalayim before the fall of the Beit HaMikdash, nobody paskin like him. Besides for his, judicial duties, nobody seemed to paskin like Nachum Hamadi. But he was respected. He was a respected judge. But for his long-term psukim, no, nobody really held like him. But this one halach that Nachum Hamadi said was retained, and that is that if a person has personal petitions in Shemona Esrei, he should say them in Shomea Tefilah. Now let's dive into this a little bit more. So Amar Bar Mina he Talia be'ashli Ravavi. So he retorted, no, the only reason we pass like Nachum Hamadi is because he really just holds like the Chachamim. He was depending on the great trees, Ashli Ravavi. He's basically just siding with one of the opinions of another machloket. Let's just do a little bit further in the Gemara. I won't do the whole Gemara today. It says the Tanya. We learned in the Braysa there's a machloket between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer bar Hyrcanus. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Shol Adam Sarcha ve'achar kach yitpalel. Rabbi Eliezer holds a person should ask for his petitions and then say Shmona Esrei. And Rabbi Yeshua Omer, I'm skipping a few lines, Yitzpalel ve'achar kach yishel tzarcha. First, the person should say Shmona Esrei, and then he should ask for his petitions. And they both bring rayot either way. Finally, the Chachamim say, Lo k'divrei zeh v'lo k'divrei zeh. They say that neither one is correct. Rather, a person should, what's the exact language? A person shol adam sachav b'shomea tefilah. So he's saying that Nachum Hamadi only held like the Chachamim, therefore it wasn't a unique position. So what's happening here is very interesting historically. You have Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua, two of the greatest Tanaim, respected as much or more than Rabbi Gamliel and Yavne. One holds that Shmona Esrei is not a place. They both hold that Shmona Esrei is not a place for putting your personal petitions, while Rabbi Nachum Hamadi holds that you could put, and the Chachamim hold you could put your personal petitions in Shomea Tefilah. Let's just finish a little bit more for Bekiah, so we should know, you should understand what I'm talking about later on. It says, Amar Yehuda Breder Shmuel Bashilas B'Shmei Rav. Allegedly, Rav said as follows: even though we've accepted this ruling that people could say their personal petitions in Shomea Tefilah, but if you want to put your personal petitions into each bracha, omer. If you want, for example, at the end of Rofei Cholim to add a personal petition for refuah, you could put it there. Another halacha, Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi Amarav, Alfa Pisha Amru Shol Adam Sacha B'Shemei Tefilah, Im Yesh Chola B'Toch Beito, Amar B'Birkat Cholim. No, you don't have to put it at the end. You could put it smack in the middle of the Birkat Cholim. Im Sarech Parnasaf, he needs Parnasai. You could put it in the middle of Birkat Hashanim. Amar Yeshua Levi, Alfa Pisha Amru Shol Adam Sacha B'Shemei Tefilah, Avalim Balomar Achar Tefilato. If a person wants to say after, besides Shomea Tefilah, if he wants to say after Yular Atzon or before Yular Atzon at the end of Shmona Esrei, Afilu Keseder Yom HaKippurim Omer. He could even say as long as the Seder of Yom HaKippurim, that's how long he can extend the end of Shmona Esrei if he has personal petitions. So this last part is interesting for contemporary halacha because some of the Rishonim see this as separate halachas. Okay, you could put it in, if you have a personal petition, put it in let's say it's for refuah, put it in Reifei Chayle. If it's for Parnasa, put it in Berachas Hashanim, etc. And these are different opinions as to what Rav said. Rabbeinu Yaina, however, has a whole complex system for this. He believes each one is another chiddush, and therefore the Beis Yosef, who actually paskins like this, says that no, everything's very deliberate. If you're doing it, if it's a tzarchei tzibor, then you have to put it at the end of the bracha as long as it's me'ena bracha, because you don't want people to think that we're changing the nusach bracha. If it's a tzarech yachid, you could put it even in the middle of the bracha because it's private. You're saying it alone in your own shmones, right? And if you want to say it in a different language, or if you want to say it in Hebrew and you want to ask whatever you want to ask, you put it in a Shomea Tefilah. And if you want to say it in any language and ask for whatever you want to ask, then you say it at the end of Tefilah. So that's actually how we paskin, most Rishonim paskin that way, and that's how the siddur is structured. You'll only see, most siddurim will only have additional prayers in Shomea Tefilah, and some of them will add in Rofei Cholim or Birkat Hashanim, they'll add one, but only for the quiet Shmona Esrei, not for the Shmona Esrei of the Shiach Tzibor. Now, let's think about besides the halachot that we just learned from this Gemara. Let's zoom out from the Gemara, and if you've zoned out for a little bit, we're back. Let's think about the history of this Gemara and what it tells us about the earliest formation of the Amidah. If you think about it for a second, we have a time where the earliest halachot about Shomea Tefilah are about the Shmona Esrei are still being argued in the Mishnah itself in Brachot. Right? We have evidence for Shomea Tefilah, and it demonstrates to us in the Mishnah Brachot itself. It demonstrates to us that the Tanaim don't seem to all agree with Rabbi Gamliel's institution. We just saw a second ago that Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua don't think that Shemona Esrei has anything to do with personal prayers. That means that in their view, the Amidah as an institution that we were creating in Yavne is a collective prayer. It's a prayer which is more important that the Tzibor should say, and possibly they even believe that Shliach Tzibor is the main functionary in the Amidah, that the Amidah is a public prayer, and that's the most important part about the public prayer. But Elazar and Yeshua did not hold, like Rabbi Gamliel, that every person individually needs to say Shmona Esrei every day. And let's see the Mishnah Brachot. Eliezer Omer, Ha'osa Tefilato Keva, Ein Tefilato Tachanunim. It sounds like, from the simple reading of Rabbi Eliezer, a person who says the same tefillah every day, not a good tefillah. Seems like he doesn't like fixed text. Doesn't seem to like a fixed prayer like Shemona Esrei. And it sounds like he doesn't like the takana of Rabbi Gamliel. Maybe he agreed with the overall takana, but having a fixed text, he didn't like that. It doesn't sound like he liked the idea of statutory prayer to begin with. Yeshua Omer, Yeshua was more reserved. He said, you don't have to say the whole Shemona Esrei. You could say a shorter version for the middle. Omer, what does he say? Hosha Hashem Adamachat Sherit Yisrael Bechol Parashat Ha'ibor. Right? Please, Hashem, what do you call it? Save your nation, the remnant of Israel, in every situation they may come, in every crossroad. Yutzar Lafanecha, should their needs be met before you. Baruch Atah Hashem Shomea Tefilah. So here again, we see Shomea Tefilah appearing at the end of this middle section of the Shmona Esrei, according to Rabbi Yeshua. And this also shows us that the Tanoim didn't all agree as to what Shmona Esrei could be, should be, and had to be. Because these Tanoim, like Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer, didn't seem to love Rabbi Gamliel's takana of saying Shemona Esrei brachos. They were even pro saying something else in the middle. And these are not the only Tanoim who disagreed. If we go to the Mishnah before, Rabbi Gamliel says, B'chol yom mitpalel adam Shemona Esrei. Every day a person says 18 brachot. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Yeshua says, no, you could say Me'ein Shemona Esrei. You could do the Havinenu, right? If it's b'makom sakana, you do the Tefilah K'tzara. But if it's like that we just mentioned, but if a regular day, you don't have to say Shemona Esrei every day. Say the Me'ein Shemona Esrei. Say the Havinenu, which is an abridged version of Shemona Esrei. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva says, okay, if you're an expert, Im Shagura Tefilato B'Fiv Yitpalel Shemona Esrei, V'Im Lav Me'ein Shemona Esrei. It sounds like it took a little while for Rabbi Gamliel's takana to take hold, because not all the Tanoim agreed with him. And many of them seemed to understand that we could use a Havinenu or something that was catch-all and end it with Shomea Tefilah, and that was enough. And this is really indicative of so many other machleksim they have. There's a machlekes in Rosh Hashanah that I haven't I was learning about last week and the week before. It's a machleket in Rosh Hashanah about whether or not the Shliach Tzibor is the main functionary of Amidah, or is it Tefilat Yachid who's the main functionary? Meaning, what are you yotze with? Are you yotze in Amidah with the silent prayer, or are you yotze in the public prayer? There's many different machlokets that we'll find between let's say, for example, one other is one of these machlokets that we'll find between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Gamliel, for example, is whether or not Arvit is a chovah. It's a formative period in the Sanhedrin of Yavne, and this bracha of Shomea Tefilah seems to have been such an ancient staple for how you end a section of Bakashot, that the Tanaim held that if you were going to abridge Shmona Esrei, if you are going to say something slightly different than Rabbi Gamliel's takana, meaning their own personal opinion for what was a better version, at least for the masses, it ends with Shomea Tefilah. Just as this was a staple in the Beit HaMikdash, so too it should be a staple in private prayer. So apparently they held saying something shorter is better. Now, let me show you the Me'ain Shmon Esrei. I'm just going to show you the Nusach HaBabli for the interest of time, but there's also a Nusach HaYushalmi. What is the Havinenu? Rav Amar, Me'ain Kol Baracha Baracha. Shmuel Amar, Shmuel gives us a Nusach. Havinenu Hashem Elokeinu l'dat Rachecha Omolet Levavenu Liratecha V'tislach Lanu Liot Giulim V'rachakenu Imachavenu V'dashenenu B'not Artzecha V'nufutzotenu Me'arbat Tikabetz והטועים על דתך ישפוטו ועל הרשעים תניף ידיך וישמחו צדיקים בבניין ירח בתיקון היכלך בשמיכת קרן לדוד עבדך בירכת נר לבן ישי משיחך טרם נקרא אתה תענה ברוך אתה השם שומע תפילה. This entire middle of the tripartite structure is looped into one bracha called Shomea Tefilah in the opinion of Shemuel. So clearly, in the time of the Tanaim, and in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, and even much later in the time of the Amoraim, the bracha of Shomea Tefilah was a staple. We see this reflected in one more place that I'm going to show you. This is a Tosefta about the so-called Tefilah Ketzara. The Tefilah Ketzara was something that Rabbi Akiva said you should say if you're b'makom sakana. You have no time to say the Amidah, right? You're on a train. God forbid someone would be on a train to Auschwitz. You have no time to daven mincha. Here's all the different versions in the Tosefta, right? Here's a very short one. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Yaser etzoncha b'shamayim ma'al, v'tei nachat ruach li reyecha ba'atov ve'enecha asei, baruch ata Hashem shomea tefila. Rabbi Yosa Omer, Shema l'tefila tamachai Yisrael v'asei mehera b'kashatan, baruch shomea tefila. Rabbi Eliezer Bar Tzaddik says, Shema kol tzat sa'akat amachai Yisrael v'asei mehera b'kashatam, baruch ata Hashem shomea tefila. So clearly, we find this ending Shomea Tefilah was a staple since the early Tanaim. It's probably because Shema Tefilat Amecha is a language from Tilim. Therefore, because the language is scriptural, it just simply became a standardized way to end a general prayer. There's some speculation that and this hinges on the idea of Shomea Tefilah. There's some speculation that the whole Chiddush of Rabbi Gamliel, the whole Chiddush of the institution in Yavne, was making what used to be a tefillah only for the tzibur a chova on all the yechidim. Meaning, originally something like in Amidah, ritzpei brachot, consecutive brachot, were only a communal event and a communal ritual. And Rabbi Gamliel was trying to enforce that everybody should do this privately. Not that the Shemona Esrei should necessarily be a prayer for your personal needs, but that what used to be a collective prayer should also be said privately, right? So it's possible, as we've noted before, that the entire Amidah is really about Geula, and it's really entirely collective prayer. However, every individual has to say it. So that's so much for the Tanaic era. How about the times? How about when we move past the era of the Tanaim, we move past the era of the Amoraim? Do we have any evidence for the Nusach of the Bracha? So the answer is some. From the Nusach of the Gonim, from the era of the Gonim, we have the evidence of the Sidurim of the Gonim, and we also have the Cairo Geniza. And the Cairo Geniza, as I have here a picture in front of me on the screen, we've rescued the Nusach, which is the alternative to Nusach HaBavli, and that is the Nusach HaYushalmi. Shema Hashem Elokeinu b'kol tefilatenu v'rachem aleinu kikel chanun v'rachumata baruch ata Hashem Shomea Tefilah. Most of the Nusach most of the Nuschot of Yerushalmi were very similar in that regard. Give me 1 second to pull up the comparison. So yeah, as I said, most of the Nuschot of Yerushalmi basically have that format. They have Shema Hashem Elokeinu b'kol tefilatenu v'rachem aleinu kikel v'rachumata, and they end just like the Bavli Baruch Shomea Tefilah. While in the Nusach HaBavli, it's slightly different. It says Shema Koleinu Hashem Elokeinu, Chus v'rachem aleinu, v'kabel b'rachamim et tefilatenu, and many versions add Kikel Shomea Tefilatenu tachanenu ata, Baruch ata Hashem Shomea Tefilah. This was the majority version in the time of the Geonim. It was very simple. It was similar to the Nusach HaYushalmi, but very, very simple. It's not until medieval times when we find that it gets very, very embellished. And this is also reflected in the Cairo Geniza. We find, for example, here, and even in the Geniza already, we find additions like this. We find Chus v'chamol v'rachem aleinu, or you'll find the kabel brachamim uveratzon at tefilatenu, or you'll find v'hei atar lanu b'tefilatenu shma nakatenu kasher shamata nakata batenu milfanecha malkenu reika maltishvenu ki kel shumei tefilatenu tachanenu ata, or another version v'reika milfanecha altishvenu ki av malei rachamim rabim ata v'hei atar lanu b'tefilatenu shma nakatenu kasher shamata nakata batenu. Clearly, the Chazanim in medieval times thought this was the perfect place to embellish and to make the bracha longer. I do not believe in, I don't think anyone really believes that these embellishments are early. Most likely these additions to the Nusach of Shema Kolenu are late. My favorite medieval edition is honestly the Minhag of, I think it's Catalonia or Provence. Give me 1 second to pull it up. The Nusach of Provence. In the Provençal areas, in the quiet Shemona Esrei, they would say Av HaRachaman all the way until Mufanecha Malkinu Reikam Al Teshivenu, and then they would end Ve'anenu Avinu Ketash Be'Tfilat Kopeh Baruch Atah Hashem Shomea Tefilah. But only the Shliach Tzibur in Chazarat HaShatz would add the embellishments, which does indicate that these embellishments are embellishments of the Chazanim. The one they would do in Provence was much longer than anything else you'll see. It said, Uzchor hamecha ukvosh ka'asecha v'kalei mimenu dever, cherev, v'ra'ah v'shvi v'izah g'tzara tzar v'oyev v'or v'umastinu mitznakim achalim ra'im u'batel kol gzerot kashot v'ra'ot me'aleinu me'alkol me'machabet Yisrael v'karev lanu Hashem Elokeinu et ha'geula ve'et ha'yeshua ve'et ha'nechama ve'et ha'chayim ve'et ha'shalom v'tavo na'lu fanecha tfilatin v'tikanes im tfilat chasidecha. That was a whole chazonic, slightly poetic insertion into the Nusach of the Jews who lived in Provence. Now, of course, as we know with medieval rites, most of these got consolidated as in the time of the printing press. To the credit of the Ashkenazim, their Nusach has remained mostly unchanged since Machzor Vitri. The Nusach that we have in Machzor Vitri 900 years later is still essentially what they pray, and therefore the printing press had no trouble providing a nusach for this bracha for the Ashkenazim. The Sfaradim, however, it gets a little bit more complicated because on the Iberian Peninsula, of course, as we know, there were various kingdoms. The kingdoms of Portugal and Lisbon. There was the kingdom of Catalonia, Aragonia, Castilla, and, well, throughout history, different, let's call it, rules, whether Christian or Muslim, of those respective areas. Now, the Jews of those different areas had their own minhagim, but as the printing press needed to consolidate and make things more economical, they typically chose the purest, least controversial forms, which was typically the Nusach Castilla. Now, predominantly, the major difference that you need to know for the Sfaradim is that in Iberia, some people would begin the bracha with Avar Achaman Shema Kolenu, and some would not. And if you look at the Sudar Reish Pei Daled that the Arizal himself used to use, it begins Avar Achaman Shema Kolenu Hashem Elokeinu. But the Arizal himself, in Nusach Tefilah, the Rav Chaim Vital says that my Rebbe recommended that we should say Shema Kolenu Hashem Elokeinu Avar Achaman Chus V'rachem Aleinu. In other words, don't put the Avar Achaman at the beginning of the bracha, because the bracha is really the bracha of Shema Kolenu. However, Rav Chaim Vital himself is so used to starting with Avar Achaman. He himself always prayed with Avar Achaman Shema Kolenu. And therefore, when he references in Drush Vav, when he references the bracha by name, he calls it the bracha of Avar Achaman. It's kind of funny. But and I believe it was Aaron Gabay who did a study of this. He said the majority of the rites of Sfarad, of Nusach of Spain, contained, the majority of those Nuschaot contained Shema Kolenu Hashem Elokeinu, and would only put, if they had Avar Achaman at all, they would put it at the end. Now, one of the reasons, of course, that the Nusach Castilla became so popular is because there was the least amount of piyut in it, and we also have the most, I'm sure even the printers probably had the most machzorim. You see, for the Nusach of Catalonia or Aragonia or even Nusach Tzarfat or Afam or other places, when they were going to put in the money to make a Siddur or literally to write a Siddur, commission a Siddur, usually it was for something that people really needed. And if you're not going to say much piyutim, then what do people need already, right? We have from Germany and France so many machzorim because nobody's going to remember the piyutim. So all of those had to get written down. But Sidur for Chol, we don't really have that from Tzarfat. We don't have very many from Tzarfat and Ashkenaz. But from Castilia, the few that we do have very much reflect the Nusach Chol. Because, I mean, that's all they were writing. They canceled all the piyutim a few hundred years before the printing press. So the fact that the Nusach of Castilla, A, they were the most powerful Jews, and B, it was so pure of any piyutim, made it the most successful in the printing press, and that's why when you look at the Nusach of the Sfaradim today, most of them have the Nusach Castilia, which is again a simple form of Shema Kolenu. The only embellishment it has is Milfanecha Malkeinu Rekam Al Teshivenu, and it ends with Kiyat Hashem Tefilah Tamcha Yisrael Barachamim. But it's not too different than the Gaonic one. Today, the shortest one is the Nusach Teman. It says Shema Kolenu Shalkeinu. V'chus Rachem Aleinu Kabel Barachamim Yasona Tefillatenu Milfanecha Malkeinu Rekam Al Teshivenu Kiyat Hashem Tefilah Kopeh Baruch Hashem Shomea Tefilah. Even that one is a little bit affected by the Spanish, but that's also one of the shortest ones. Now, oh shoot! I wish I had in front of me those two Sidurim. But if you open in a modern Sidurim, let's move on from the medieval times to modern Sidurim. If you open a Sephardi Sidur on the one hand, and an Ashkenaz Sidur on the other hand, you'll find two different insertions, optional insertions for the Nusach of Shema Kolenu. So some of them will begin. The Sephardi ones will begin Ribono Sholam, Chatati Ufanecha, and then it says there's a Ribono Sholam to have a vidoy in your sins, and then there's a hiratzon for parnasa. While in the Ashkenaz versions it begins with an Ana Hashem Chatati Aviti Pashati, and then I believe it goes into the hiratzon for the parnasa. So why is that the case? The reason for this is because Rav Chaim Vital didn't remember what that Arizal told him. He writes in Shar Kavanot in Drush Vav that he doesn't remember the exact nusach that the Arizal told him that a person should put in the middle of Shema Kolenu. He remembers that, of course, the Zohar in Balak says that Shema Kolenu is a good time to pray for Parnasah. So my Rebbe told me to pray for Parnasah in Shema Kolenu. And he told us to do, I'm sorry. The Zohar in Balak says that it's a good place to put a vidui, and therefore we put a vidui in Shema Kolenu. But my Rebbe told me it's also a good place to put a bakasha for Parnasah. I wasn't sure what the nusach of the vidui was. Was it an Ana Hashem Chatati Aviti Hashem Nubaranu Zalnu, or was it a more simple vidui? Therefore, because in the area called Nusachat Tefilah and Shara Kavanot, Rav Chaim Vital basically says Ribono Shalom, Chatati Aviti Pashati, and in Drush Vav he says Ana Hashem. Some of the printers and some of the Rabbanim were familiar with reference point A. Some of them were familiar with reference point B. But however, this Kabbalistic, it's not really entirely Kabbalistic, but this additional prayer, which was written by the chief Mikubalim of the Lurianic circle, these prayers were inserted into Shema Kolenu respectively, based on what section of the Shar Kavanot they were familiar with. And that's why in the modern Sidurim, we have this discrepancy, because Rav Chaim Vital himself has a discrepancy in Sha'ar HaKavanot of the Arizal. So that, for the most part, I believe, concludes our shiur on Sha'ar Kavanot. On Shomea Tefilah, or some people call it Shema Kolenu. And Bezat Hashem, the next time we learn, I think it'll be in 2 weeks from now. This is the Sukkot vacation coming up. The Sukkot holiday, the Yom Kippur is coming up. So next time, Bezat Hashem, we'll discuss the Avodah. If I have time, what are we holding today? Wednesday. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about Yizkar. I hope to maybe drop a bonus episode about Yizkar, so look out for that. And we will continue Bezat Hashem next time. Chag Kasher v'Sameach, everybody, and Gemar Chatima Tova.